This lesson covers the versions of Windows Server 2012, its requirements, and the differing features based on the version you purchase. I wanted to start by quickly reviewing the versions available, or SKUs for stock keeping unit, for Windows Server 2008 R2. And as can be seen, there were a lot of different versions. There was Standard, Data Center, Enterprise, Web, Foundation, High Performance Computing or HPC, and an Itanium version. Each of these different versions had either different role and feature capabilities and/or different scalability limits. For example, Windows Server Standard did not include the Active Directory Federation Services role, but it also, as we scroll down to the other differences for the technical specification, does not have failover clustering capabilities. Notice Standard does not have any entries, whereas Enterprise and Data Center both have 16 nodes. In addition to the different capabilities, also there are differences regarding scalability. For example, the Standard Edition can accept 32 GB of RAM, whereas the Data Center Edition can take 2 TB of RAM. Also, there are differences in the number of processor sockets supported, with 4 for Standard, 8 for Enterprise, and 64 for Data Center. Another key difference between the versions are virtual instance rights, or operating system environments, OSEs, which relate to virtualization. For the Standard Edition of Windows Server 2008 R2, a single virtual machine also running the Windows Server operating system is included with the standard license. For the Enterprise Edition, 4 virtual machines running Windows Server are included with the Enterprise license, whereas Data Center allows an unlimited number of virtual machines running the Windows Server operating system. The key point for this is these refer to virtual machines running the Windows Server operating system. You can run other virtual machines running other operating systems, desktop operating systems on the host, provided they have their own licensing. In fact, it would be possible to run more Windows Server operating system instances on, for example, Standard Edition than one, providing you had other licenses to make sure they are covered. All these rights referred to are included virtual machine rights running the Windows Server operating system. While there are differences in scalability between Enterprise Edition and the Data Center Edition, one of the primary reasons organizations pick Data Center over Enterprise is when they are virtualizing their environment and want to be able to run an unlimited number of Windows Server virtual machines on a particular virtualization host, and also move them between hosts using various virtual machine migration technologies. I'm now showing the Windows Server 2012 licensing datasheet, and this is much simpler than Windows Server 2008 R2. The number of versions or SKUs has been drastically reduced. We now have 4 options: Data Center, Standard, Essentials, and Foundation. Enterprise and Web Server, which were commonly used in enterprise organizations, have been removed, and instead, enterprise organizations will choose either Standard or Data Center Edition. Also available are the Essentials and the Foundation editions. However, these are focused at smaller companies. Essentials is limited to only 25 users, and Foundation is limited to 15 users and is only available through OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, as part of a purchased server appliance. A big change from Windows Server 2008 R2 is that Windows Server Standard and Windows Server Data Center are now identical in terms of features. As I scroll down to the actual capabilities, you'll notice that Data Center and Standard are shown together. They are functionally identical. They have all the same roles and all the same features. They have exactly the same scalability capabilities as well. There is no reason to use Data Center over Standard in terms of a role you may require or to support a certain type of hardware. The only difference between Standard and Data Center are those virtual instance rights, those virtual operating system environments that I referred to in 2008 R2. Data Center regains the unlimited number of virtual operating system rights, whereas Standard has been increased to 2. What this means is, as you look at which version you require, most likely if you are deploying virtualization and will be running a large number of virtual machines on a server, you will purchase Data Center Edition. If you are deploying an operating system to a physical box and not using virtualization, you would use Standard Edition. Both Data Center and Standard are licensed by processor now, and each license covers 2 physical sockets or processors in the server. If you had a server with 4 processors, you would require 2 licenses of Standard or Data Center. Windows Server 2012 requires a 64-bit processor, which is the same as Windows Server 2008 R2. For organizations that have servers that currently run Windows Server 2008, they may have a mixture of servers with a 32-bit processor and some with 64-bit processors. Windows Server 2008 came in 2 separate architectures, one for 32-bit and one for 64-bit. It's important to note that if you have servers with 32-bit processors and you want to deploy Windows Server 2012, you will have to change the processor in those servers to a 64-bit processor, which most commonly will also require a new motherboard and potentially other components in the system. An important factor to consider when you are planning your upgrade from Windows Server 2008 to 2012 is to make sure you understand the architecture of your servers. Is it a 32-bit processor or a 64-bit processor? Those running 64-bit will be able to run Windows Server 2012. Those with 32-bit, you will have to change the processor or completely replace the server. While the minimum amount of RAM is 512 megabytes, this will only be okay for basically lab-type servers or very low workload. Most servers running Windows Server 2012 typically have a few gigabytes or potentially much more of memory. 32 gigabytes of disk space is also the minimum for the operating system, the page file. However, if you have a server with a lot of memory, you may require more disk space depending on the page file allocations. And finally, for Hyper-V, you need to make sure your processor supports hardware-assisted virtualization. This concludes the lesson on Windows Server 2012 versions and its core requirements.